This is Judaism Unbound, episode 52, Nothing Sacred. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofus.
And we're really excited to have with us today Douglas Rushkoff, the well-known media theorist and author whose ideas have been highly influential in many, many spheres in the world. His ideas have also been extremely influential in the world of Jewish innovation. His book, Nothing Sacred, The Truth About Judaism, came out about 10 years ago and made a huge impact on people who are thinking about how to think differently about Judaism. We're really excited to explore that with him today. Douglas Rushkoff is the author most recently of the book Throwing Rocks at the Google Bus, How Growth Became the Enemy of Prosperity. His books also include Present Shock, When Everything Happens Now, and Program or Be Programmed, 10 Commands for a Digital Age. Douglas Rushkoff is also the author of a number of graphic novels. One in particular, Testament, is very applicable to a lot of the ideas that we're talking about. It looks at biblical stories and then brings them into application to contemporary times, science fiction type of ideas. It's a great graphic novel that we really enjoyed and highly recommend. And his most recent graphic novel is called Alistair and Adolf, which I look forward to reading very soon. Douglas Rushkoff is also a podcaster in his own right. His podcast is called Team Human, and you can find it at teamhuman.fm. And in addition to all that, he is a professor of media theory and digital economics at CUNY Queens. So Douglas Rushkoff, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to talk to you and thrilled that you've joined us here on Judaism Unbound.
Thanks for having me.
So you wrote your book, Nothing Sacred, The Truth About Judaism, a little over a decade now. And just as a way of getting started, we were hoping that you could sort of look back on that and talk about some of the key ideas that still resonate with you, both trying to think about what you thought were the key ideas back then. And, if in the ensuing decade you've had other thoughts, love to hear how you look back on it.
I mean, I would say the main difference between then and now is then I still had some hope that institutional Judaism could be steered away from its obsession with numbers and with superficial forms of fidelity in order to embrace what I saw as a true renaissance in younger generations' ability to embrace the more core ideas and ideals of Judaism and Jewishness. But now, after all this time, I don't really have that sense of optimism or that sense of faith anymore. I mean, I still believe that, Torah and Jewish texts and Jewish process offer civilizations some of the most powerful tools and insights that we could use to survive the coming age, even as a species. I feel that institutional Judaism's intransigence and fear, and I understand there's fear of extinction, there's all sorts of existential fears, but that the focus on really thinking about what is it that we can do for Judaism rather than how is Judaism a gift for this species at this moment in history, that imbalance is just not something that I want to dedicate my time and energy to. It's like I don't want to save Judaism from itself. I'd rather use what's great about Judaism as I can in my work, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, and move on from there.
So let's step back and just look back at what you were thinking about when you wrote the book, because as I think we're working similar to what you're talking about. We're trying to work directly with Jewish people that are out there that are listening to this podcast, many of whom have written to us and said how exactly what you're talking about, that the kind of messages that we're talking about here are not coming through from institutions, and they're excited to be able to work with the material, and that the internet potentially really allows them to get at the material in a way that they weren't able to before. And so to the extent that that's true, I'd love to jump into the ideas that you laid out in Nothing Sacred about what is valuable about Judaism and what you had and hopefully still have hope about how it can contribute to the world as we are going into it.
It's a big subject, and even, one book is still one tiny little spark in the whole thing. The main thing that got me to all this was I'm really more a media theorist and a cultural theorist than a Judaism scholar. And I was looking for a way of articulating what I saw as a more balanced approach to the development and integration of digital technologies into our lives and into our work. And I was being confronted mainly by kind of techno-utopians from the Wired magazine, NASDAQ Stock Exchange, letter rip side of things. And on the other end of the spectrum, there were these very worried people. Oh, no, we can't let kids use computers because all these bad things will happen to them. So it was very hard for me to stake out a middle ground where I was saying, yeah, these technologies are great if we deploy them appropriately and in a balanced fashion, and in ways that aren't serving the market alone, but also serve human intelligence and society and our social reality. And I wanted to look back historically to find, was there any other time where people had to deal with a major new medium that had the potential to shift civilization from one era into another? And I realized that the perspective that I was attempting to share with people was really the perspective of Judaism, where Judaism was really dealing with most basically, it was dealing with the invention of text. That Judaism was in some ways a response to the ability to record history and create contracts into the future. It was the beginning of the axial age, when we went from being a roaming nomadic people to a farm-based people. And what was that going to mean? How do you deal with property and land and contracts and agreements? And what we did was we wrote a contract with God, a covenant, which made God way more predictable and created the beginnings of a moral code, and we developed the law. Moses sat down with Yithro and said, okay, let's figure out how we're going to govern in a way that's open and transparent, that anybody can read, anybody can ultimately add to. We're going to create this a set of documents that are not set in stone, but are intentionally, just like the U.S. Constitution, evolutionary and can have comments and changes. And I realized that sort of that open source tradition of Talmudic and Midrashic Judaism was very consonant with the open source ethos I was trying to argue for on the internet, where we don't lock things down, we don't have black boxes, we don't have Facebook algorithms working in ways to present society to us in a fashion that we don't even know how it's making its decisions about who we are. Nothing is transparent. Everything is protected with IP, and that's a very dangerous world to move into. So I thought, isn't Judaism interesting in this way? But then as I spoke to more rabbis and more Jews about this, I realized that a majority of the Jewish institutions, particularly the institutions that were attempting to save and revitalize Judaism, were oblivious or intentionally ignorant of Judaism's open source nature. It was as if they didn't trust Jews with Judaism and thought, look, let's use the current generations of Judaism as kind of as drones who will mindlessly repeat and archive the real Judaism, so some future generation, when things are better, can look at the real gems here. And as I saw it, that was killing Judaism. And most of the appeals I saw to younger or more intelligent Jews were MTV marketing style. Oh, we're going to make Judaism hip, or we're going to do the Christian rock thing with Judaism. And in the midst of it all was this bizarre UJA or UJC sponsored counting of Jews that they do every certain number of years. They count how many Jews are there so we can worry everybody. If it's too good, we'll kind of not talk about it, but if it's bad, we can use this data to make sure people don't intermarry and make sure they join synagogues, and we can show them, look, Judaism needs you. And I wrote this New York Times op-ed saying that we've got to stop counting Jews. Don't do Judaism by the numbers. First, because it's Talmudically prohibited to do censuses on Jews. You're not allowed to count. Even when you do the minyan, you have to go, feels like about 10. You're not supposed to go 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't count them. So first, it's explicitly against the rules. And second, it sets up, it's not a great appeal to young people saying, oh, you got to be a Jew because we're running out. There's not enough. You know, is that a great appeal? Oh, you got to come see this movie. Nobody's seeing it. You know, that's great. You know, where Judaism has such good appeal, such a strong, genuine appeal to this moment. So I wanted to look at how did Judaism get into this trouble. And, you know, what I argued in there was that you know, in part it's, the fact that we were persecuted so terribly for so many thousands of years that we've ended up kind of accepting our persecutors' understanding of what Judaism is as this kind of racial thing rather than this this brilliant set of ideas and practices. We ended up in a troubling relationship with Israel, in that we started to see Israel not as this kind of necessary compromise for a people that get attacked and tortured wherever they live, but as the realization of God's plan, as if the modern notion of a nation state as agreed to, I guess, at Versailles, if that's what God meant when he's speaking to Abraham. And it's like, that's not what nation didn't mean that. Nation was a people. Nation was a different thing. And the fact that we're using, you know, that we're trying to marry modern United Nations style political nationhood, which is always going to be a messy, dirty thing that involves killing, that we're trying to marry that so perfectly with Judaism rather than saying, look, states suck. Let's try to do the state thing as Jewishly as possible, but it's not the thing. And finally, that when you are using, as we do now, when you're using the words of Torah as a real estate claim on a particular piece of land, it makes it impossible to use Torah in the multidimensional, metaphorical, allegorical way that it actually works. Torah is a transcendent document. It's a multidimensional, transdimensional thing. If you're needing Torah to be saying, this little piece of land here, this nablus is ours, not yours, then it flattens it out, and we can't play with it. So when Jews want to come up with new interpretations of things, when they're looking at Torah intelligently, that activity has to be stopped, because looking at something as an open, arguable set of texts makes it harder for us to use them as certain inviolable claims on things. It's the same as the way, there's sort of progressives who love the idea that the Constitution of the U.S. can be adapted over time to meet our changing requirements as a people, and people who are like, no, we got to stick with the original just as it was. And that, I feel like we're in that. So what I was doing in Nothing Sacred was trying to argue that nothing is too sacred in Judaism not to be discussed, that Judaism is this wonderful, dangerous, Judaism's not for everyone. That's why, it's a tricky covenant. That's why you don't try to convert people to Judaism. Who wants to do this? This is a hard way to go through life, where you're going to question everything, where you're in a constant discussion. And I really was trying to show as much evidence of possible that Judaism is not a religion of blind faith, but a religion of literacy and practice, that the way you become a Jew is by demonstrating your literacy in front of a minyan at your bar mitzvah. I can read this Torah and I can speak intelligently about it. Now let me have a seat at the table where I can argue to the death with you about, what this all means. And I saw it as very positive. The book and my contention that we shouldn't be counting Jews ended up getting me banned by the UJC. Still to this day, if I'm invited to do a talk at a Jewish institution and the institution gets funding from the UJC, they get a call telling them, no, you can't have Rushkoff. And I see myself as such a defender of Judaism, and the idea that nothing is sacred does not mean Judaism is not sacred. It means that no nothing is sacred, that's the whole point, that we built a covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant we build is one without a God on the top. Instead, it has two cherubs, one on either side, protecting the empty space, because it's in the empty space between Jews where God appears. I'm not saying that nothing's sacred. I'm saying that nothing is sacred. That nothingness, that empty space, is sacred. And if they can't get that, they can't get that.
It's very clear to me, listening to you, that your passion is real and that your defense of Judaism is not manufactured. So I hope that anybody listening who's associated with the Federation would consider bringing you in. But on a related note, so you've spoken a bit about the ways that institutions frame Judaism that really, I would say, to use a Yiddishism, are a shanda, that are a shame and pose Judaism as something that it isn't. And I'm curious if we can delve a little deeper into your framing that you do offer, with one little cautionary tale, because I'll be straightforward. I'm very resistant, and Dan and I have spoken about this, to any claim that there is sort of an essence of Judaism. And the reason for that is because usually when people pose such essences, they're doing so through the lens that you just critiqued. They're doing so through this numbers lens. They're doing so through sort of a conservative preservation mindset. But your essence, it would appear from your book, you pose this trinity. You pose iconoclasm, monotheism, and social justice. And I'll be real, it got me thinking, because it was the first, or one of the first essences that I actually kind of liked. So I'd love to hear you expand upon what you meant by that threefold core of Judaism and why that's the core as opposed to something else.
The core as I see it, at least the core as many progressive Americans I know understand it. What I was arguing was iconoclasm is the killing of the false gods. Iconoclasm is the plagues that we do at Passover, where each plague of the Passover story is really the desecration of another Egyptian god, gods that we, as people who had lived in Egypt for 400 years, that we ourselves probably believed in. Blood desecrates the Nile, locusts desecrate the corn, darkness desecrates the sun. Each of these things were gods. The killing of the calf, that was the big god of all, was the calf that was killed in April, which was Egyptian New Year's. We knew what we were doing. We understood what the story was saying. So you kill the gods in order to get abstract monotheism, so that you no longer have these individual gods to be arguing about. Gods are no longer local or national. God is a more universal and ineffable thing. So once you stop trying to see God as the physical malach, the fire-breathing God that makes you sacrifice your kids, once it gets more abstract, you can stop worrying about God and become peer-to-peer and start worrying about other people. And you realize that the real task here is social justice, is to make the world a better place for the other humans. That's why, again, on the covenant, we got rid of the God and had the empty space, because it's between, there and the empty space is where I'll come to you. So I saw that if social justice is really the highest goal, you can't serve God. God doesn't need you. God's doing fine. The only thing you can do is serve the other people. If social justice is the goal, then to me, the rest of Judaism is about how do we fuel or enable or inform that social justice. What is social justice? Well, read Talmud to figure out what social justice is, or look at the mitzvot to understand what social justice is. But how do you bring yourself to do that is iconoclasm. You've got to kill your false gods. You do. And, we still have them, whether it's Taylor Swift or the dollar or your retirement fund, whatever that false god is, you've got to kill that false god in order to hopefully be able to tolerate abstract monotheism, which is hard for people. This was the arguments that St. Paul was having with the Pharisees. He's like, people can't do this abstract monotheism thing. They need a blood ritual. Come on, let me stage something for you guys. The Romans went for it. The Romans, when they developed Catholicism, they're like, oh, good. That this is better than Passover. This is real blood. This is body. People can relate to that. You got a face on this religion now. It's branded. And I understand, and I'll talk to a lot of the Jesuits even who say, look, people need that. They need a face on their religion. They need, you can't just give them, Messiah is going to come someday. God, you can't know what God looks like. You can't touch God. You can't smell God. It's just that's too difficult. I don't think it is. And it's certainly not too difficult, shouldn't be too difficult for Jews. That's our job. And there's some critique. Not everyone, we're not all powerful all the time. I believe that's why we have synagogue, because it's to reinforce that you go in there and fill yourself with that fuel, with that Shekhinah, with whatever it is, by davening with other people, you can give yourself the energy you need to do the real job, which is to go out and do social justice for others. And then the whole thing, then you look back at Judaism understanding that, and then it no longer matters that Purim was a Babylonian holiday that we adapted for Judaism, because then you can have the courage. It shouldn't be frightening, but you should have the courage to be able to see, oh, look, it's not our original holiday, because then you can look at, well, what did we do to that holiday? We took a fertility ritual and turned it into a social justice holiday, about the liberation of a people. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. But there's many synagogues where if I go in and do a talk and I explain that Purim was based on, Marduk and Astarte from ancient Persian culture, people are like, oh, no, don't tell me that, I can't. It's just too upsetting. It's too upsetting for them.
Well, so that maybe helps get into this question, and maybe the sort of world of open source in the technological world can sort of help shed light on this, right? When we agree with you, right? When we look at something like Purim and see that it was constructed in that way, part of how we look at it is that it gives us license to reconstruct it. The question is that when you move into sort of an open source world and a disintermediated world where, every Jew can now get all this access to all this information and potentially remix it and remake it in their own life in a different way, how do we avoid sort of breaking the system or breaking it, or how do we try to build something that's greater than the sum of the parts, as opposed to just sort of empowering lots of different individuals to kind of take this stuff in all kinds of different ways, or is that just not a problem as you see it?
Well, Judaism is not something you do alone. Judaism is something you're not supposed to open Torah unless you got 9 other people there to argue about it with you. So the only times that we do this stuff alone are in these weird messianic moments. It's like the Isaac Luria moments, and the crazy times is when people are sitting alone in their attics, trying to interpret this stuff by themselves. So, I think the way that we prevent that is with, Havara and networks of people interacting with one another, so you don't just go crazy and off on your own. The other way of looking at it, and it's true, is that at a certain point, it's funny, I had a talk with Richard Gilman about this. He's a very big conservative rabbi at JTS for decades. And he finally argued it's up to each community to decide what halakha is for them. And that's a really frightening thought to those who want to see Judaism as absolute, that there's a right way of doing it, because there just isn't. There's so what the Sephardic, so they eat rice on Passover. So then what do we do? Are they not Jews? Oh no, they're allowed to because it's theirs. Well, okay, so it is theirs, so they're allowed to. Everyone's allowed. At a certain point, you stretch it too far, and something about it breaks. And you'll see, and those communities will either continue or they won't. You look at the Kabbalah Center. Does that count as Judaism? They're wearing yarmulkes and they're calling it Judaism, but by golly, that stuff's pretty strange. So I think, there's going to be pseudopods that break off and do other. Christianity, they were Jews, and they broke off and they're doing this other thing. I worry less about more people doing more kinds of Judaism. I worry less for the whole than I do when there's only centralized people doing centralized Judaism. I think that the mix, some are going to fall off the edge, but that's the price you pay for being adults. Judaism is meant to be an adult religion. It's not something that you can just believe. You got to actually, do this thing.
I mean, Yitz Greenberg has this beautiful, I think, theological perspective where he talks about that in every of the major transitions in Judaism, God has stepped back one step further, and that has left humanity with more responsibility. And in order to shoulder that responsibility, the group of humans responsible had to become wider. And so, first it was the priests, a very small group, and then the rabbis, a larger group. And, his idea 20, 30 years ago was that now this is the age of the lay people, by which I think at that time he was talking about leaders of large Jewish organizations. But I think, and we're experiencing this with our podcast and the response to it, that the digital revolution has really allowed that responsibility to be shouldered literally by everyone who wants to shoulder it. And the question then becomes, if in the age of the rabbis, we kind of had a way to maybe trust that the system would be less likely to break, because to become a rabbi, you had to study for a long time and have a certain level of responsibility. But now if everybody can do it, how do we make sure that, is there any way to sort of try to increase the odds that what people are going to be doing is going to be valuable? You have these ideas about iconoclasm, monotheism, and social justice. How might we kind of promote those ideas among the various Jews that are out there remixing everything so that we're likely to actually get stuff happening that might discover something really exciting?
I don't know. I mean, I think the trick is to do it in as a non-elite way as possible. I originally came up with this idea called Reboot, which was originally got funded by the Bronfman Foundation, and it was a kind of an invitational summit where I invited 50 really smart Jews to come to this, just to come for a weekend retreat, and most of them were kind of lapsed Jews. And I asked them, well, if you were in charge of Judaism, what would you do? If Judaism were a completely open source tradition, what would you do with it? What would you do? What should our generation do with Judaism? And did it as an open space style, unconference. And all these great ideas came out of it. And what my intent was then to take this process and share it with every Jewish community that wanted to engage with it. So every Reformed synagogue say, we're going to have a weekend where we discuss what is Judaism to us and how do we want to, and what mechanisms do we want to develop to enhance that. But the original funders thought of it, no, this really should be more a way of kind of doing a diffusion marketing strategy on Judaism. So if we get influential people in the media and culture to come to this thing, and if they become more Jewish, then they're going to make TV shows and art and stuff that then goes to the rest of the culture. So they had a kind of different view, but I do think that portable kits, conversations in a box, what's the Jewish equivalent of the Boy Scout manual? I mean, it should be Torah, but Torah is a pretty dense object. So if we had some mechanisms, here's something you can do in your community, here's something there, and in part it may be moving away from the real estate model of Judaism also, where a Jewish community becomes really organized around the mortgage of a large building, and you're spending $2,000 or $3,000 a year as a family, and most of that money is not going to the educational staff, but is going to this edifice. That's really hard, and then it's a matter of looking, do we need these buildings, and is this the right size and shape?
I have a question, just sort of latching on to the term you used, lapsed Jews, because you use it in your book, and I was really interested in it, and it's a subject that Dan and I talk about a lot. We don't always use the same phrasing, but what you seem to be alluding to is a set of people who are Jewish and maybe even connecting in a deep way to this threefold set of core principles that you're talking about, iconoclasm, monotheism, social justice, but who aren't necessarily doing so through, Jewish auspices, through institutions, etc. And I guess I'm curious to hear, when you talk about lapsed Jews, what characterizes them? Especially those that you just alluded to who are really smart lapsed Jews. What did you hear for them? What were some of the good ideas that came out of that? And for those that do want to find ways to take those three core principles and channel them out there into the world, and not just, static ideas of Judaism that aren't as interesting. How do we do so in a way that connects with those kinds of people and such that they can, that they can continue to do so themselves?
They're going to do what they're doing. So you say Robert Reich or somebody. I think he's Jewish. I mean, you would think, you're a big labor advocate, cares about the world. I don't think he's going to synagogue. All those zillions of young people I know and older at the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center. So there's people who are actively at work, actually doing the thing, actually getting people off death row, saving lives, helping workers find solidarity and livable wages. As I understand it, they are practicing Judaism, or they're certainly practicing the social justice part of it. They're certainly doing the thing that Judaism was invented to promote, whether or not they understand that it's informed by Judaism. Now, I do think it would be nice for those folks to know that what they're doing was informed by Judaism, was informed by their tradition, and that what they're doing is the noblest path in our tradition. Only if for no other reason that it would help reinforce them. It would help. It helps me sometimes when I'm in a particularly difficult battle to know, look, this is what my great-grandfather was doing when he was fighting the Cossacks in Russia. This is why he got hanged. This is why those relatives were killed in Auschwitz. I get it now. This is hard, especially as America moves into fascism. It's becoming all the more clear to see what those of us who live in a kind of a fact-based culture, now that we understand why people who live in fact-based culture are oppressed, because the facts contradict what the king is saying, or the myth maker is saying, wow, that being connected to facts is going to be a real liability over the next decade or so. This is interesting. So, for those folks to have a sense that they're involved in an intergenerational struggle is powerful. To the extent that it limits them, though, to thinking about it as, oh, this is the Jews thing and not the blacks thing or the Irish thing, or something that belongs to the struggle itself belongs to all of these people. This is just the way that and that's the thing I'm understanding, is that the social justice part is the universal part. The Judaism part is a particular part. It really is. It's not until Deuteronomy and the second set of prophets that, are one God alone, as opposed to, just our God is our God. That feels a little bit like an error. I'm okay with our conception of abstract monotheism being particular to us. I'm okay with that. And I think we got to be. And once it is, you don't take it quite as seriously. You realize that it's a spiritual, intellectual advancement that allowed for us to purge our addiction to the gods of a death cult and dedicate ourselves to social justice and to see other humans as the holiest things in our dimension.
So I'm not sure if my question is going to really be about the abstract monotheism or about the other stuff, and maybe it's a little bit of both. But as I was listening to you talking, I was thinking, at least for me, we've talked about Bernie Sanders, for example, as the instantiation of the Jew who is a great Jew but doesn't practice, ritually, right? That through our show, that's been our kind of example that we've talked about, in part because his Judaism was questioned in the press, and he had a really interesting Jewish answer for his Judaism, which was, my family died in the Holocaust, and therefore I learned that politics is serious business, and I got to make sure this never happens to anyone else, and that seemed very Jewish on a lot of levels. So as I think about this in my mind, it's that the value of Judaism would be if it somehow got you to engage in social justice more effectively than not having Judaism, right? And the question becomes then, if that's the case, then somebody who's living a life of social justice, it's wonderful for them. The concern would be that if Judaism is an effective means towards promoting a life of social justice and somebody is not living ritually or however we want to define it as a Jew, then maybe they're not going to be able to pass those values on as effectively to their children or to other people in their community, or that somehow Judaism could be an effective vehicle for that. And that's where, I kind of struggle, for example, with the monotheism question, because, maybe it's monotheism in contrast with iconoclasm in the sense that, maybe in our time there's some need to speak in a different way about the theology of Judaism to people who don't really accept that? Are there ways in which perhaps through iconoclasm and a commitment to social justice, we need to revise our understanding of monotheism in order to speak to the people for whom that doesn't speak, so that we don't lose the capacity for Judaism to be an effective means to living a life of social justice? Something like that. I'm just sort of exploring, like, what are the limits? And maybe that goes back to Lex's question about the essence. Is there an undying essence of Judaism? Or is it possible that even that has to be adjusted a bit?
Well, there's a lot of people who would say to be a Jew you have to believe in one God. But I know a hell of a lot of people who identify Jewish and atheist. The funeral of my mother-in-law yesterday, and my 11-year-old daughter says she's an atheist to the rabbi there, so she doesn't want to say this part of this prayer or do this thing. And, God bless, right? God bless my little atheist. I think that atheism's perfectly, that's the thing, I think atheism's perfectly consonant with Judaism, which again gets me yelled at by certain people, but it doesn't matter really what you believe. And if you do follow what Yitz Greenberg and the rest of Klal is saying about Judaism, is the evolution of God in Judaism is towards not just absence, but potentially non-existence. That God the Father, whatever, goes away, and then we're it. That's why I started the book with Joan Rivers quote. Can we talk? Grow up. It's that. If we are the adults here, then we take charge. Of what's happening in our world. And I do think Judaism's asking that we do that we get off our need for a father figure to tell us what's happening, and we accept reality as something that, for which we are the shepherds. That's why I thought that Judaism, at least as I understood it, would be perfectly safe in a post-theistic society, that Judaism is not threatened by postmodernism, is not threatened by science, because Judaism is a process. It's a way of moving through the world rather than a set of beliefs that get contradicted by some discovery of no God or this God or something like that.
So in that case, how does the focus on monotheism as one of your three pillars work? Like, is it that you're reinterpreting monotheism, or that it's not necessary?
Well, I say it's abstract monotheism. In other words, that what we really did was moved, it's the path through which Jews got to social justice was, iconoclasm. And once we were able to do that, God abstracts from these tokens, these icons, to more of an embracing idea or an animating force. God becomes increasingly abstract, less of a character and more of a life itself, whatever life is, or nothing, and so that gets you to social justice, that once God gets himself out of the way, then we can focus on helping other people.
So as you see it, what would you say are the kind of core, let's call them technologies, that Judaism developed and that are still, you think, relevant, that if we could figure out ways to make them work in our time, that they actually would help people live the kind of lives that you hope that they'll lead and the social justice that you hope they'll do?
No, we got tons of them. From literacy to the Sabbath, the idea that the first thing we do when we're as recovering slaves is give ourselves a day off, the idea of a sacred time to realize that you are sacred just the way you are. You don't have to do anything to be worthy of existence. If we even understood that, we'd be able to get to social mechanisms like guaranteed minimum income and, things that are perfectly consonant with the idea of humans as okay just the way they are, but they contradict the idea that, well, you have to earn your place on the planet, as if just being born is not enough. You go through Torah, look at the stories, look at how reality is explained. Even the notion of history and time led to the Jewish invention of progress, which is both a liability and a great principle. Because progress, it also led to expansionary markets and interest-bearing currency and a growth-based economy, colonialism and the spread. A lot of these notions of progress and history and how that worked has led us down some dark paths. The idea of a universal suffrage and cosmopolitanism is part of what Jews are hated for. The idea that, all people and immigrants and everyone should be accepted and all, that's precisely what America is responding against right now. No, they're not people. It's them and us. There are divisions. It's not a universal thing. There is not one planet here. That's why anti-Semitism rises in periods like this, because Jews are recognized as sort of the original migratory cosmopolitan culture, that we're the original ones saying, yes, we're like this now, but someday you're going to be accepting of gay people, and someday women are going to have the same rights as men, and someday you're going to realize brown people are fully human, not just 3/5 of a human. That's the message of the Jews, and a message that regional, bounded, specific cultures feel very threatened by.
I'm soaking in the prophetic voice here. I think that's what this is, and I think it's what we need more of. And I think that this question of how theology plays in and how belief plays in, that you've both gone back and forth on, is a really huge one. And it's not just the theology, it's sort of the question of truth, or like absolute truth. And I'm thinking about something that came up in your book about how we seem to be hiding some of the truths of Judaism, and this alludes back to Purim, what you were talking about before. We hide the origins of things that came from other societies because we want to be the inventors of everything. We hide the fact that, there's no evidence for the existence of, say, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob historically. We hide all sorts of things, and the idea behind that sort of obscuring is that, I don't think people do this with ill will. I think they hide because they believe that if people were aware of the possible untruth or falsehood of these stories, that they would be unconvinced to buy into the general framework and the underlying ideas. So I think they come from a place of meaning well, but it does some real damage. And I'd love to hear you, because it's about God. Like, that's the most common thing, is we have these, antiquated notions of what it means for God to exist, to the point that even people who believe in God today are defining it differently from how they used to, and how some rabbis might want to. But how does this question of obscuring Jewish reality play into all this? And what can our institutions learn? Maybe what can we as individuals learn as we might move away from institutions in some ways? What do we do with all this?
Spinoza thought you had to speak to people on two levels. And when he wrote, the idea was that, okay, I'm going to write really smartly for people to get that everything's up for grabs, but I'm going to write also for regular people who don't want to be challenged on that level. Because if I write overtly in the former way, I'll just get excommunicated and they'll burn all my books and bad stuff will happen. The question is whether we can still afford to do that. Most Jewish institutions believe that they need to dumb down Judaism for the masses so that the masses have something to cling to, so they have something to hold on to. And the thought of going in front of a congregation and saying what they all learn at JTS or HUC, to say, well, Moses seems to have been more than one person, doesn't he? And there's the sort of Midianite guy that came up. There's the prime minister, or that thing with the baby in the basket down the river. There are these 6 other stories that came before that about these babies going down the thing and what? Moses isn't real. What are you saying? Oh my God! What? No. And I've seen people, even in, they go on Sunday morning, 20 people will sit with the rabbi and do the Torah portion. They'll do the portion for the week and analyze it, and to see the horror that people have when you talk about, even just simple stuff like the various writers of Torah, or when this thing seemed to come in, or you look at the Etz Chaim Torah, and the footnotes of that, they're already basically referring to different things and where they came from and the different writers. That's really upsetting to people who want to believe that somehow these 4 books were written, by Moses with a chisel on, Mount Sinai. I think that childlike relationship to Jewish mythology is a luxury we can no longer afford. Our understanding of Judaism as a religion, rather than, as I understand it, as the process through which human beings get over their need for religion, that's the central problem here. I would say that while Judaism really, really, really tried, it ultimately failed at doing the thing it tried to do. Judaism wanted to be the unreligion, and it wanted to do it while also balancing people's slow ability to grasp that. I mean, there's not many of us, even in America now, who understand Judaism being as powerful as we believe it is. Most Jews think that Judaism needs to be protected from this kind of thinking, that it can't, they don't have as much faith in Torah as we do. They think it's brittle. They think it's just one little thing. They don't get that they're actually sitting on perhaps the most powerful artifact yet developed by our species. And their inability to see it, keeps the power of this thing rather dormant.
Wow. On that really important note, we are going to arc towards the close of our episode. Thank you once again for coming on and sharing this conversation with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
We are going to close out like we always do by encouraging our listeners to be in touch with us. And there are a few ways that you can do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. You can also go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com, where we have show notes for this episode, for all of our other episodes, and all sorts of other resources. And last but not least, you can hit up our email addresses at dan@nextjewishfuture.org or lex@nextjewishfuture.org. The last plug we like to make is that you can always support us, and we really do appreciate any amount of monetary donation that you're able to send our way, and you can do that at JudaismUnbound.com/donate. So thanks so much for listening, and with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.